So I've been keeping this under wraps, but I'm no good at keeping a secret. Finally, time to tell you. I'm getting married! John Cena finally proposed. I had to say goodbye to my other boyfriend, Jason Momoa, but it's worth it. Have you seen that ass?
April Fool's Day!
Hello, Champagne Nightmares. Welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, I don't know how you found me, but I hope you'll stick around. Keep on lurking and subscribe and join the family. My name is Janessa, and I am North Dakota's trash queen of glam, geek, and gore. And we all know what day it is, assuming I get my shit together and edit this in time. It is April 1st. It is April Fool's Day, and what better way to celebrate than with a brand new horror video all about the 1986 slasher classic, April Fool's Day. I love this movie. This is one of my favorites. I discovered this as a kid, and let me tell you, this was a frequent rental from our local gas station. I loved this, and I would rewatch it and rewatch it. It was so much fun, and so I had a good time revisiting this and writing about it and researching some of the people. It's so much fun. So if you're excited to talk about April Fool's Day, then stick around because we're getting into it right now. So April Fool's Day is all about this rich girl, Muffy St. John. How 80s can you be? Muffy has a private island that her family owns, and they have this lake house, and all of her friends are gathering to go over and visit her at this lake house. So we open up, and somebody has a camcorder. It's very meta, and somebody is recording one of the other people, and they're kind of playing April Fool's jokes on each other and laughing and ha 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 ha. And all of her friends are gathering, and they're saying that they're going over to Muffy's Island to spend the weekend with her and just have a good time and party and let loose. So at the very beginning, we see Muffy, who's played by Deborah Foreman. Deborah Foreman was in Valley Girl. She's really fun, and she started to do the convention circuit, so I'm hoping that I'll get to meet her at some point if I venture out of my cave and go to another horror convention. And it opens up with her in the basement, and she's kind of moving a mannequin and some random things around. And this maid, I think her name is Clara, is like, "Are you sure you want me to leave? There's not another ferry back to the mainland until Monday." And she's like, "No, you're a peach. Go on, go home, blah, 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 blah." So she's getting ready, and she's going to have this party. And then she finds this dusty, dirty old Jack-in-the-Box. And she starts playing it. And this is kind of our title sequence. So she's turning the crank, and we see flashbacks. Young Muffy, who is getting this Jack-in-the-Box as a gift. And so we flash back between adult Muffy and child Muffy turning it. And then eventually there's like this scare where this like rubber puppet comes out and is like, "Ah!" And it's not very well done. It's pretty cheesy. And so that's kind of the opening thing, is to give you this little like scare at the beginning for people who are scared of Jack-in-the-Boxes. That's like a little thing to like trigger you to start the movie. Fun. And so all of her friends are gathering on the docks, and there's a whole collection of very 80s people. So on the dock, we meet Nikki, who, despite my absolute conviction, I looked her up on IMDb, is not an Arquette. She looks like she's an Arquette. I swear I thought it was Rosanna Arquette. It's not. Her name is Deborah Goodrich. Maybe that's a married name. I refuse to believe that she's not an Arquette. But so Nikki is kind of the wild, sexy one. We also meet Kit, who's played by Amy Steele, who was the final girl in Friday the 13th Part 2. So she's kind of a little bit more quiet. And then we meet Nan, who's kind of a nerd. She shows up late, and she's brought a whole bunch of books with her so she can study for finals while they're there. It's over spring break, and so they're gonna have this good time for this weekend, but she's like, "I still have to study," and she's kind of uptight and into poetry. And then there's all of these doofus boys. All the boys in this movie are just dumb. So we have Arch, who's kind of the Joker, and he's kind of like a jock who's all about trying to get the ladies, and he thinks he's very funny. And then there's Chaz, who's a little bit of the Alterna guy. He's got these pants that will make your eyes bleed. They are really terrible. And then there is Rob, who is Kit's boyfriend, and he is like very serious and kind of sad. And you find out a little bit later in the movie that he had an interview with his guidance counselor at college who said that he's probably not serious enough to go into medicine. So he's all bummed out about that, and they have this fight. It's so stupid. He's there. And then there's Skip, who's kind of the brooding, like, he's kind of cute, kind of jokey, but he's also like, he smokes cigarettes, and he's like, fuck the man. Like, he's that guy. We've all met that guy. And he is Muffy's cousin. So he introduced himself, hey, he's Muffy's cousin. So we know that he's kind of related, but distant cousin, we don't really get along, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So he's going out there. And then this car shows up at the very end, almost misses the ferry. And it's got Rob is a passenger, and he's riding with Harvey. He's this like Texan capitalist. It's like they ripped him out of a cheap knockoff of Dallas. Like if you order Dallas on Wish, you get Hal. And so he's kind of there to be this sort of like, hey, I'm going to go work for Muffy's dad's company and I'm going to make a bunch of money. And he's kind of a cheesy capitalist goo. And so they get onto the ferry and they keep saying like, this is the last ferry. In case you weren't sure about the schedule, they are very clear multiple times that it's the last ferry until Monday. I wonder if that'll be important later. So they decide to go out, and there's this kind of grizzled old guy who's running the ferry, and then he's got a deckhand named Buck. And so they're going, and they're looking at this beautiful island, and then they see this big, like, mansion of a house. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that's, like, rich people problems. And so they're going, and the ferry gets closer, and so then Arch and Skip are kind of playing this gag or whatever, and they're like throwing this knife. So Skip has a knife and he's throwing it, and they have to try to reach it without falling over. Arch loses, and Skip kind of makes fun of him, and he's like, shut up, man, or whatever. And then he's like, no, whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And they're back and forth. What just dumb toxic masculinity. And then Arch is like, shut up, and throws the knife and stabs Skip. And so he like starts bleeding, and he's like, ugh, and he falls into the water. And people are like, oh my God, oh my God. And so the guys, Rob jumps in the water, and Chaz acts like he's going to jump in the water, but he just like, let me take my shoes off. And he's like, ugh. And so then Nikki, who's with Chaz, is like, what a man you are. And he's like, I took my shoes off. What do you want from me? And it's like, maybe to jump in. So then it's revealed that Skip is playing a prank. He's got a blood bag, and it's like a breakaway knife. And so it was all a gag, ha ha ha. And Buck had jumped into the water as well, the deckhand. And so they're getting close to the dock. Buck is like, oh, I'll just stay in the water. Because the guy's like, hey, Buck, get up on the deck. You got to rope the bridge or whatever. I don't fucking know how to drive boats. I'm a drag queen. I'm not a boat driver. So there's something where you got to rope it to the dock. And so he's trying to do that. And he's like, oh, I'll just do it from down here or whatever. And then you see the ferry get closer and closer to him. And the dock has these like logs underneath it. And he eventually gets trapped in between them. And so all of a sudden he comes up and his eye is like dangling down onto his cheek. And he's like screaming in a rage. And everybody's like, oh my God, what is happening? This is crazy. Out of nowhere, Constable Potter is just in a boat. Just like in a boat. And just like zips over. What he's doing there, nobody knows. He's just like stationed nearby. It just happens to be there. Here's the commotion, comes over. They throw Buck into this boat. And he's like, I'm going to kill you kids. I'm going to kill you kids.
And they're like, oh God, I think Buck wants to kill us. Oh God, what are we going to do?
I didn't say that everything was very believable in this movie. I just said it's good. So Constable Potter takes off with Buck or whatever, and then takes him to the hospital. So they go in and they meet up with Muffy, and they take a look and they're like, oh my God, this house is amazing. This is great. And Muffy kind of tells them, go find your rooms, go get settled in, blah, blah, blah. And there's all of these little pranks as they're going on throughout the night. And so like when they all sit down to dinner, there is a chair that like, it's got little hinges on it, so when Arch leans too far back, it tips him out, and he kind of does a somersault backwards. And then she gives them a champagne toast, and they've all got dribble glasses, and so it runs down the front of their clothes. And so there's all these April Fool pranks. Isn't this funny? Ha ha ha, so cute. Well, then things get less cute. So Hal goes upstairs after he's been in Muffy's dad's study, and he steals some cigars. So there's like some fancy cigars, and he's like the little business guy. So he's like, I need a cigar, huh? So he takes them upstairs, and he's in his room, and he's smoking one of the cigars, and it explodes, and his face is all blacked out, and it's all ha ha ha. But then he's going to unpack his clothes, and he opens up a drawer, and there's some newspaper clippings about people who were killed in accidents. That there were these accidents and people died. And then he opens up the closet and there's another news story on the back of the closet door. So you start to get a sense that there's some things that are happening that are not as harmless as some of the other tricks. Nikki finds this like bondage gear, and there's some indication that maybe she's kind of into bondage. When they were getting ready for dinner earlier, they'd been taking this quiz in a women's magazine about sex. Like, how was your first time? And she's like, A and D. And A is like painful and degrading, and D is like wildly exciting. I had an orgasm. And so she says those together. So it's kind of hinted that she might be into like bondage, and whether she's a dom or whether she enjoys like being a submissive, whatever it is, there's some early tie to her with bondage. And then she gets like a gimp mask and a couple other like bondage sort of accessories, some handcuffs and stuff. And then Nan, later that night, goes to take a shower. And when she gets out of the shower, there's a tape recorder in her wardrobe in her room that is playing the sound of a baby crying. And Nan is visibly upset. So clearly there's been an abortion, there's something that's going on, and nobody was supposed to know about it or whatever it was, and she's very upset. So the next morning, everybody gets up, and there's been all of these little, like, tricks and things, and then everybody kind of pairs up. Nikki and Chaz go and they have sex in their room, and Arch is like trying to go around and hit on people, and he gets shot down every time. And so eventually he's got a porno mag, and he goes into his room, he's like, I don't need you anyway, and then falls backwards. It's another one of those hinged chairs. It's like a whole thing. So up to this point, everything has been very tame. Now on the way in, Skip is feeling kind of guilty, and he kind of says something that's maybe meant to echo out a little bit further. He says nothing bad ever happens to Muffy. And so there seems to be a little bit of resentment there or something, and we're going to get back to that later. At dinner, there's these Barbie dolls with these real fucked up faces. I don't know if they thought they were going to get, like, Mattel was going to come after them for using real Barbie dolls, so they, like, did something to the faces to make them look different, but they're clearly Barbie dolls. And so they're all dressed as the different characters, and so their place settings have like a custom doll. Those will be important later, but it's pretty lighthearted until we get to like the newspaper clippings and the bondage gear, the crying baby sounds. Well, the next morning is when things start to get weird. So Kit comes down to the kitchen, and Muffy is there, and she's making some breakfast, and her hair is really disheveled. And last night she was in this like fun 80s like romper jumpsuit that was like black with some sequins on the shoulder, and she was very bubbly. Now she's very disheveled. She's kind of quiet and mousy and like, oh, and she's like jumpy. And so when Kit comes in, she's like, I didn't know what people would want, so I started to make a little bit of everything, and she like rushes off. And so she's acting weird. We don't really know what's going on. So the next morning, everybody gets up and they're all gathering for breakfast, and then they realize that Skip isn't there. And so last night, Skip had been drinking. He had been having this conversation with Nan about, you know, a poor man can say, fuck you, Dad. And what happens? His dad disinherits him. He hasn't lost anything, but a rich man's son. There's all this pressure. It's very whiny white boy problems. So he's drinking and wandering around, and he goes down to the boathouse, and it's dark, and you see a hand like grab him from behind, and then it's the next morning. So he is missing, and everybody is starting to figure this out. So everybody's like, well, where is Skip? Where did Skip go? Have you seen Skip? And nobody knew where he was, and nobody has seen him. And all the other girls were banging other boys, so they don't know. They were busy. Nobody knows where Skip is. So they note that he's missing, but nobody thinks to do anything about it. So they're just like, whatever. So Rob and Kit go down, and they're going to go swimming. And they get out, and then Rob had this confession where he wasn't probably going to get into medical school. And so he's like, Kit, why are you wasting your time with me? And she's like, yep, you're right. We should probably break up. And she like takes his hand, and she's leading him into the boathouse to have sex with him. So she's going to like, she lays down a towel, very classy. And then they start to get undressed or whatever, and they're laying there and they're making out. And all of a sudden, the boathouse has like big slatted floors with big gaps in between. And so they're laying there, and all of a sudden, Kit, in between the slats, a boat comes by underneath, and she sees Skip's body, and he looks dead. He looks very pale, like no blood, kind of greenish colored. And she screams, and they go running out, and they're like, we saw Skip, but then the body's not there. They can't find the body. The boat never comes out. The boathouse is not that big, and it was like moving, and it never comes out the end. So where did the boat go? Nobody thought to go like look under, like dive in and go under the boathouse because they're at a dock. They could just go check. They're like, we should look around. We should try to find him. So they're like, we're going to go search the grounds. And it's like, but he wasn't on the grounds. He was just in a boat in the water. So do you think his dead body moved to the grounds on its own and nobody saw it because the boat never came out from under the boathouse? What's happening? Let's Nancy Drew this situation, because we're not making great choices. So they split up to go search the grounds of the island for this body that they think has inexplicably moved from a boat under the boathouse onto the island somehow, of its own volition. So they go and they split up and they're looking around. So Arch is in the woods and he keeps hearing twigs snapping. And you see this snake. And there's this snake that's like coiled and watching him. And then he steps into a rope trap that pulls him up, and then he's hanging and he's swinging, and that freaks the snake out, and the snake starts kind of lunging at him. So this figure in like dark pants like kicks the snake away, and then Arch is like, and then it cuts away from him. So now Arch is missing, and we don't know what's going on. So everybody's like coming back, and they're like, did you find Skip?
No, weird. That dead body didn't get out of the water and hide somewhere on the island. We didn't find him.
And they're like, where's Arch? And they're like, we thought he was with you. No, we thought he was with you. Now Arch is missing and probably dead. And he was on the island, so maybe you should check the water, because clearly you're not making great choices for where to look. So Arch is now in a problem area. He's been disappeared, and we don't know what's going on. So Nan confronts Muffy about, what's up with this baby tape? Who told you? Like, was it one of his frat boy friends and all this kind of stuff? So she's kind of being vulnerable. She's like, I thought you wanted to really be friends, but you just brought me here to make fun of me. And Muffy is just like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I have to get away. Like, oh, it's weird. And so she goes running off. Rob tries to call Constable Potter, and the phone is not working. It's not connecting to the mainland. So another problem, of course. We love a good Agatha Christie closed-door mystery, so there's no fairy till Monday. The phone's not working. So Kit is like, what are we going to do? So Muffy comes in, and she's got all this tea, and she's like, maybe I'll make tea. Everybody's like, what? And she's like, I thought it would relax everyone because of Skip and Arch. And she's talking very strange. And so they're like, okay, whatever. So Kit goes to fill the teapot, and brown water comes out. And Muffy's like, oh, no, that happens sometimes. The main must have broken. And so then they're like, wait a minute, bitch. You invited us to this country house. There's no ferry till Monday, and now there's no water? And she's like, well, there's still the well. So now there's this janky old well. So Hal and Nikki go off to the well. First, Hal drops the bucket in the well, and then Nikki, who's got a flashlight, drops the flashlight in the well. They're just not succeeding at life. Eventually, they see that there's rungs down the side, and Hal is a chicken, so he makes Nikki go down. So Nikki goes down, and she falls into the water. She slips out, one of the rungs comes out, and she loses her grip, and she falls into the water. So she's screaming, and she's like, oh, flailing around, I gotta get out of here. And Hal's at the top like, oh, what's going on? And then as she's floating down there, all of a sudden, these severed heads pop up. I don't know what they were doing. They were like submerged below the water, but now they're going to float. And so Skip's head comes up, and then Arch's head comes up, and then Nan's whole body, she's got like a slit throat. She comes up out of the water. Hal has to climb down and try to reach her. She can't reach the rungs. The ones that she could reach have fallen out of the wall. So she's trying to get up. He's trying to get down to get her. And there's all these body parts just floating around that were somehow not visible, that were below the water, but her just being there, all of a sudden they just appear. And so she eventually gets out, and then she's freaking out. And she's at the kitchen table. And to calm her down, someone brings her a glass of water. So she freaks out, of course, because she was just in a well with several partial dead bodies. And so she's like, ah! And they're like, relax, it's Perrier. And I'm like, wait a minute, bitch! Like, before we were freaking out because we didn't have any water, and now people are like, it's Perrier. And I'm like, these rich people would not survive. This is why people watch shows like Naked and Afraid. Because if you take rich people, they don't know how to do nothing. I was like, what the fuck is going on at this island in this moment? So Nikki's all freaked out. So then they're like, we need to stick around. We need to stay together. Ugh, it's too much. What's happening? What's going on? Everybody's dead. So then we love a red herring, especially if it's going to amount to absolutely nothing in approximately 30 seconds. So somebody says, this is all about what happened on the ferry, isn't it? Well, then they get a phone call from Constable Potter, and he reveals that he's been at the hospital with Buck the whole day. So it can't be Buck. We didn't even, stretch that out. We didn't try to, make that a thing. So if you've forgotten about Buck and him yelling about, I'm going to kill you kids, if you forgot about that, you got approximately 15 seconds to be like, oh, I bet it is Buck. And then they're like, it's not Buck. Okay, so it's not Buck. Rob is on the phone and he's listening. And later he tells Kit that he told me that we should all be careful. We should watch each other, especially Muffy. So then they're like, what's going on here? Is Muffy doing something? Muffy's been acting weird all day. She doesn't look like herself. She doesn't act like herself. Kit is in the study, and on the desk, she sees a picture of two kids that look like twins. And we can tell, if you are a sharp observer, that the kids look like the little girl that was opening the Jack-in-the-Box in the beginning sequence of the film. And all of a sudden, Muffy, breaks in. She's like, I am not worried about Skip and Arch. I think they're going to be fine. And their kid's like, okay, whatever. Let's get back with the others. And then they, Muffy's doing something elsewhere. And they're like, what if Muffy's a suspect? Did she bring us here to kill us? What's going on? What's happening? And then Muffy walks in. And it's super fucking awkward. Because they were just saying that maybe she's a murderer.
And then they're like, how are you doing?
What's going on? She's like, I'm going to go to my room. And they're like, I think we're all supposed to stay together. And she's like, this is my house. And then she just leaves. And they're like, yeah, I think we're all going to go to our rooms. So Nikki and Chaz go up to their room. And so Rob is like, I'm going to try to find the attic. Because the constable was going to send up a flare when he got there. He was coming to the island to come help them. And so they're like, well, I'll send up a flare. He's like, if I'm in the attic, I can see it better. And then Hal is like, I'll watch the stairs. So Nikki is packing. She's freaking out. She's like, I'm just going to go wait by the dock. I want to get the fuck out of here. I don't like this place. This is scary. Chaz is trying to calm her down, and he, puts on the gimp mask and then, lays on the bed and is like, come, get me, and, trying to be sexy or whatever. So she goes to the bathroom to get some more clothes and stuff that she had there. And then she comes back, and he's still laying on the bed, but he's got his hands over his crotch. And she's like, oh, funny, are you going to show me yours? And then I'm supposed to show you mine. And his hands move, and his crotch has, a puddle of blood in it. So, you're supposed to believe he's dead because they cut his dick off, I guess. And then as she's, screaming, then the door closes behind her. There's not a lot of gore in this movie. And we're going to talk about why a little later on. And so she just kind of and then it cuts to somewhere else. So then we're upstairs. They find the attic. We get some cutaways where we see Hal on the stairs, looking around. And he's brought a gun. So he had been in his room, and he revealed that he had a gun packed away in his suitcase, and he sticks it in his waistband. Kit and Rob are up in the attic. And they're waiting, and they're looking around, and the attic is looking really creepy. And then they find all of the Barbie dolls. And so all of the Barbie and Ken dolls are upstairs. And the Nan doll and the heads from Skip and Arch are in a bucket of water, or in a bowl of water. And so that's clearly the well. And then the Nikki and Chaz dolls are on a bed covered in fake blood. And so then they're like, this is weird. And the other dolls are just sitting there. And so they're like, what's going on? This is crazy. And the red flare goes up. So they're like, we got to get everybody else. So they go down, and they're running around, and they're trying to figure out what's happening. And Hal's not on the stairs anymore. We don't know where he is. So we're going around. We're going from room to room. And Nikki's door is locked. She can't get in. And then she, sneaks around, and Rob scares her by accident. And then she's like, I couldn't get into Nikki's room. It was locked. And then Rob tries the door, and it's just open. And so then they open the door, and all you see is the base of the bed with blood dripping down. They don't show you anything. But because you saw the dolls upstairs, you're supposed to understand that they're on the bed, bloody and dead. And then they go to Hal's room, and they find him hanging. So he's hanging by his neck with a noose.
We have to get Muffy. She's my friend.
And it's like, bitch, have you not figured out that Muffy is the problem? So Kit somehow is still trying to believe that Muffy is not the one responsible for all of this. And eventually, Rob just convinces her to leave. They go down, and the boat is there, but there's no constable. Constable Potter is not there. And they find a letter on the seat that talks about Muffy's twin sister, Buffy St. John, that she escaped from an asylum and she's still on the loose, and they think that she's coming home to her, like, island home. And they're like, oh, shit. This isn't Muffy. It's Buffy. Again, so 80s. Muffy and Buffy. So they're like, we need to get out of here. And then they're like, oh, there's no keys. And for some reason, the constable had Muffy's family's boat. That doesn't make any sense, because he was already on the water when he got there, but now he's like tooling around in their boat. And so they remember that there were keys in the kitchen, so they're going to go back up or whatever. And all of the doors have now been shut and locked, and they're like, what's going on? And there's this window that's propped open. So they go in and they're looking around, and then they see etched on the wall, there's like a height thing where they're tracing like Muffy and Buffy. And you see on there like, oh my God, it wasn't Muffy, it was Buffy. I felt like for all the information they had, it took them a little long to come around. Earlier, Rob and Kit had found a painting in their room that had the eyes cut out. This was a very 80s thing where there would be like a picture with eyes cut out so that somebody could watch from behind it. It was very Scooby-Doo. And so they had found this and it was in front of a cat clock. Well, now that painting is suddenly in the basement, but they're shining a flashlight and they can see that there's eyes behind it. And they're like, oh my God, what is it? So he's like, pull it away. So he pulls it away, and it's Muffy's head. And so Muffy's head falls out. All of a sudden, Buffy shows up outside, and she nails the window shut. Now, somehow, even though she's the one who locked all the doors, Buffy has now locked herself outside. So they go up to the kitchen, and then Buffy comes to the kitchen door and can't get in because she's locked herself out. And so they're trying to get the keys, and Kit is like screaming, and Rob goes into this closet, and the door shuts, and he's trapped in there. And then Buffy gets in the door, her knife like picks the lock or whatever. So now Kit is like facing off with Buffy. And then they're like back and forth. Like she's trying to get away from her. She's like, you don't have to do this, Buffy. You don't have to do this, whatever. And then Buffy jumps up on the table and it's a big thing. And she's got this big knife. And all of a sudden she lunges at her and then she backs up and Kit opens the door. And there's everybody just sitting there reading magazines. April Fool's Day! So it turns out that all of this has been a big, elaborate joke. None of this has actually happened. So everybody, Buck is there, the guy from the ferry, Constable Potter, and everybody that we thought was dead, they're just hanging out. And Kit comes in. They don't acknowledge her. They still just sit there. And then all of a sudden she turns around, she's looking at Buffy, and it's like, what? What's going on? And it turns out that what's happening is that Muffy is going to inherit the house. But her dad wants to make sure that she can take care of it and she can make it stand on its own. So she's going to turn it into a country inn with a murder mystery weekend. And so she wanted like a dry run. So that's why there's not a lot of gore. That's why they cut away before any of the kills, because the people weren't actually getting killed. And it turns out that Buck from the ferry is a makeup artist, and so he did the prosthetic. And he actually shows up in the closet with Rob and like peels the eye prosthetic off and shoves it on Rob's face, and then he breaks out and is like freaking out. The Constable Potter is not really a cop. He's their Uncle Frank, and he was just there to kind of help them. That's why he had the family's boat. And like the ferry driver is just a ferry driver, but they like had him in on it or whatever. And she said, I have to apologize. Some of the clues went a little bit farther than maybe was necessary. I really want to apologize. But we had fun, didn't we? And you can see Nan sitting in the back, and she's still clearly upset. So Muffy's like, you know what? If I do this, obviously they're going to know what they're getting into. It's not going to be this personal. I really apologize, but I think we had fun. It was so great. Thank you for helping me test it. I'm going to inherit this place and I want to make it a success. And they're like, wait a minute, how did you fake the twin picture? And so the twins had a very androgynous kind of short haircut. And they're like, well, there is a crazy twin. It turns out that Skip is actually Muffy's twin, not her cousin. So he is the crazy twin, and so he helped out. He was a little bit in on it, but not fully. So then they start drinking champagne, and they're like making out with the fake prop heads that they used in the well and all this kind of stuff, and everybody's having a good time. And so all is forgiven, or so we think. They decided to tack on this little ending scene that I think is very interesting. So Muffy is drunk, and she goes back to her bedroom, and she's holding a bottle, and she's clearly just wasted. There's like a noose in her room, and she like pulls it down out of the rafters or whatever, and she sees that there's a wrapped gift on her bed. And so she takes a sip, and she sits down, and she grabs it. She opens it, and it's a Jack-in-the-Box. And she starts turning it, and she's like, oh, and she's turning it really slow. And then she sets it down. She's like, I don't think I want to do this. And then she picks it up, and then she does the last part really quick, and when the clown pops out, Nan pops up, all dressed in black with a knife, and slashes her throat. Except she doesn't. It's this big moment, and there's all this blood, and then all of a sudden, Nan reveals that the knife has a cutout to go around her throat, and that it's got a blood bulb, and she's like, April Fools. And then the movie is over. So that's the ending. And then there's this fun song about too bad you're crazy, and it's really kind of a fun song. That ending to me is so interesting because it made me start thinking more about Muffy. Because what I find very interesting is that Muffy is set to inherit this island. But then we find out that Skip is her other twin. And so there's a lot of stuff in this movie that's very like traditional roles and all this kind of stuff. And so I started to think, why is Muffy inheriting the island house and not Skip? And it puts a whole different twist on Skip's conversation with Nan, where he's like, oh, if you're a poor person, you say, fuck you, Dad, it doesn't really matter. But if you're a rich person and you say, fuck you, Dad, it matters. So there seems to be some divide between Skip and the family, but nobody really knows why Nan is here and how she knows Nan and how Nan became a part of this. And so the fact that she knows something as intimate as this abortion story is very interesting. So when all of a sudden slicked back hair, all black Nan is like doing this fake prank of slitting her throat, it's almost sexy. They have this moment where they're kind of looking at each other, and I was like, is this like a lesbian relationship that's been under our noses the whole time? Is this some like hidden queerness? And that's the thing about being queer in the 80s, is that there was so much subtext that you had to go digging for. Horror movies would have kind of these queer moments or these queer possibilities and not include them as like text, but rather as subtext. So I got the feeling once you get to that end screen, I was like, is she with Nan? Is Nan like her partner? Are they going to be the lesbians who run the murder mystery bed and breakfast? I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by it. It gives me a whole new reason to watch it. And that's why I love like old 80s slasher movies, is that sometimes there's just these little nuggets that you can really kind of play with. There's a little undercurrents, so then to have Nan there, it feels very meaningful that she shows up at the end and that she's not the uptight, repressed Milton quoting Nan that we saw earlier in the movie. She's much more svelte. She's much more Gina Gershon in Bound. She's very sexy. There's some possibility there. It would be interesting to hear what you think. Let me know down in the comments below if you've watched it, if you ever had any questions about what the relationship is between Muffy and Nan. But that's April Fool's Day. I think it's a fun watch. I think that it's a great early slasher movie without a lot of gore, but it's got some really fun mystery elements and the way that it plays with it. And the first time that I watched it, I was generally surprised by the resolution. I probably shouldn't have been. It's called April Fool's Day. They've been playing April Fool jokes the whole time. I probably shouldn't have been surprised, but I really was. So I enjoyed it. I think it's a good watch. 1986's April Fool's Day. That's the end of the video. Let me know down in the comment section below. What did you think? Have you seen April Fool's Day? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Are there other slashers from the 80s you'd like to hear me cover? Is there anything with like a queer subtext that you think I should explore? Let me know in the comments below and we'll see what kind of new horror movies we can dissect in the future. While you're down there, don't forget to give me that thumbs up. Or if you're like, you're just a living spoiler, I can't take it, give me that thumbs down. It's all engagement. I will take it. The algorithm isn't a picky bitch, and neither am I. While you're down there, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell notification icon so you'll be notified of all future uploads. I do my best to upload at least one video a week, and sometimes, if you're really lucky, you might even get a bonus video. Ooh, St. John's Psychopath Terrific! If you'd like to chat, banter, or commiserate between uploads, all of my social media will be linked down in the description box below, including a link to my website, The World of Champagne, at JanessaJ.com. Thank you so much for watching. I love and appreciate all of you, and I love horror movies, especially 80s slashers. So these movies are always a joy and a delight to do. So if there's any other 80s slasher movies you want to see me cover, let me know. I would love to do it. And until I see you again, bye. Dark panted figure. Dark panted figure. I don't know how that came up. They decided to tack on this little ending scene that I think is very interesting because why?